P-A-R-A, 4136 Barton Road, Lansing, Michigan, 48917. Walt's phone number, 517-323-2460. The recording was made on June 13, 1990 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Walt, if you would just start perhaps with your name and your address and your phone number, please.
Okay, Walt Szpara, 4136 Barton Road, Lansing, Michigan, 48917. Area code 517-323-2460.
Okay, and then take us back, if you would, to when you started and what was going on, what you were doing.
Okay, I graduated from Michigan State University Electrical Engineering back in 1948. And that same year in June, I started working at Oldsmobile. I was hired and interviewed by Don Burnham.
Okay.
And Don was looking for somebody to put into a college graduate training program in the manufacturing engineering group. And I remember that the first assignment, I was up there talking to him, and he called up Jim Edwards, and he had me go out and see Jimmy.
Okay.
Go out and see Jim.
All
right. So I went out and saw Jimmy, and he introduced me to a fellow named Ed Ditto.
Okay.
And Phil Cartwright.
Okay.
And he had me work a while with Ed, just so Ed could show me the type of operations that they dealt with.
Yeah.
Phil put me out in the plant layout department. And the first assignment I had there was to lay out some conveyors in the plating department.
Okay. Which was where?
Which was out in building 78.
All right.
After that assignment, I think I was out there probably 3 or 4 weeks. Burnham would have me come back to his office, then he would reassign me. He had me go out and see a fellow named Marv Katke, who was in the engine plant.
Okay.
And Marv was kind of a taskmaster. He put you right to work and told you what he expected and what I ought to be thinking about, what I should be doing. And he'd every morning he'd have me report to him, and he'd give me assignments to go out in the plant, do some things for him, and come back and report.
What kinds of things were you doing, Walt?
Watching line rates, seeing if where they were having problems, if I could come up with some solutions, or just make observations for him as to what I thought was going on, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I was only there about 3 or 4 weeks again, and then I'd be moved. I was moved out to Mike Minnow's area in the assembly plant.
Okay.
And from there, I went to Del McRae's place, the press metal.
Mm-hmm.
Worked for Babe Corwin in traffic.
Okay.
Worked for Abe Goosen in purchasing department. And I did that for 12 months.
Oh.
At the end of the 12 months, I was assigned to the plant engineering department. And that's where Don wanted me to be situated.
Okay.
And the first assignment I had there was working with Bill Rasmussen out in the new assembly plant, where we were putting in the new transfer type conveyors. And I remember that the average hours out there were 10 hours 10 hours a day.
Okay.
6 days a week. However, in addition to that, we'd work extra overtime, and I remember working hours like 85 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
And I'd be there till 2 in the morning.
Gracious.
And not only would I be there, but Don Burnham would be there. The guy that he worked for would be there. And we'd all be there till 1 or 2 in the morning because we were having such difficulty making these conveyors work. I don't know if you were there or not at the time.
Oh, no, I wasn't there.
But when we first started up those conveyors, we were piling up cars one against the other and smashing them together.
Okay.
You know, the car would come down, side transfer, that hit the other conveyor, that had to pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
Everything had to work in coordination.
Is that the first time we tried those kinds of things?
Yes. But eventually we got all the bugs worked out, and that worked out pretty well, and we modified them each year and made them better in operation.
Yeah.
And pretty soon it was a pretty smooth operating plant, and it was one of the better operating plants I've had for General Motors.
And all of that was in 32 and 5 Walt?
Yes. Other job that I worked on, I remember putting in the 90 millimeter gun installation
In
in building 37.
7? Okay.
We had some awful deep pits that we had put in because we had to plate those gun barrels vertically.
Oh, wow.
And so those guns had to go down this way and be
Wow.
chrome plated.
Oh, wow.
And then they were machined after the chrome plating was done.
Okay.
We worked on the Szpara jet engine over at Plant 3.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little ahead of myself there, I guess. I was the engineer in charge of constructing 301 and 302.
So you started
just
with an empty field.
Empty field, right. And that was my project. I eventually worked up where I handled the project.
Uh-huh.
And so we put in 301 and 302.
What kind of things, Walt, not to interrupt, but what did we have peculiar about that site? Was that a odd construction situation or unique things happened there that you remember?
I can't remember anything unusual happen. I remember that in the excavations, an excavation for the footings and
Yeah.
the footing walls, that we would find all kind of old debris in there, and some of the bottles that we found in there were very unique and different.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Must have been an old
And
dump or something.
they'd run up with these bottles and say, "Boy, look at this bottle here, you know, how unusual looking it is,
Uh-huh.
how old it must be." And so we found a lot of things like that, just like you'd find in any old site that might have been a dumping ground from, the late 1800s or something.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, the project went fairly well.
Do you know why we bought that site initially? What
I think-
precipitated that?
I just think that we were running out of room at Plant 1. We kept adding buildings at Plant 1.
Yeah.
We filled in between buildings at Plant 1, and we went as far as we could. And we needed more capacity. All the time that I was with Oldsmobile, every year we sold more cars than the year before. There were some years when maybe we stabilized and maybe went down, but the overall trend was up.
Yeah.
And we got to a point where we needed room outside of the main plant area. And so we went over and built at Plant 3.
Right.
And then, of course, you and I were both involved in Plant 5. And
Plant 4 was in there.
I was involved in Plant 4. And
So now,
we just,
Walt, the building at Plant 3 faces west. The front of Plant 3 faces
Yeah,
west.
right.
Why is that?
I guess I can't explain that. I don't
It's kind
know.
of an odd situation.
I remember when we built Plant 5, we had different orientations
Yeah.
for that, remember?
Oh, yeah.
And we met out there once on a Saturday. Ken Knight called up and we all went out there, and I don't know whose idea it was, but we turned the building around, didn't we?
Right.
And it might have been yours.
Or, I don't know, but we made a lot of changes there.
Right.
Okay.
And
Okay. Well, when you first came in and were working in the car assembly plant as an engineer, was that typical for a new engineer to go into a place like that and go to work?
this was the first time that Oldsmobile had one of these college graduate training programs.
Yeah.
And there were about 8 of us that were
Okay.
selected. Trying to think of some of the other people. One guy ended up being head of purchasing and head of material control. Van Ness.
Oh, okay.
Van Ness was in that group.
All right.
And there were 6 others besides Van Ness and I.
This was their first attempt at
First
that sort of
attempt
thing?
at organizing a group like that.
Okay.
Jack Reitner was in there.
Oh, all
Product
right.
engineering.
Uh-huh.
He was the 3rd one. And this group of 8 would meet once a month
Mhm.
and exchange experiences and
Okay.
ideas and talk about what we were doing.
Yeah.
And as I say, Van Ness ended up in the purchasing department.
Mhm.
That's where he was intended to go. I ended up in manufacturing plant engineering. I kind of enjoyed working with Burnham because I always figured he was quite an unusual individual.
We don't know much about him.
Even at the time that, after I had been in plant engineering for some time, he would call me up to his office and want to know how I was doing. And he was the one that would encourage me to make objectives for myself. He said, now you have to make objectives for yourself. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And he'd keep pushing me, see, and I thought that was kind of good for me because lots of times you get hired into a place and you get in with the group, and nobody's asking you those kind of questions.
That's the last thing.
But he eventually went to Westinghouse.
He was the works manager at that time? Is that what he was?
No, the works man. I'm trying to think of.
Or was that Downey?
Downey was the works.
T.C. Downey.
T.C. Downey was the works manager, and he worked for Downey.
He worked for Downey.
And after I'd been there for a while, he got moved to an assistant product engineer, chief engineer.
Okay.
Assistant chief engineer. And from that job, he left for Westinghouse.
Okay. Yeah.
And I ran into him once, and he said that he made a promise to himself that he wasn't going to take anybody out of Oldsmobile that he knew to Westinghouse. He wasn't going to rob.
Like so many people
General
did.
Motors. Yeah. Marv Gadke, the guy that worked in the engine plant, he went to Ford.
Okay.
And I can't think of anybody else that might have left the way those two guys did.
Yeah.
Jim Edwards, of course, went on too.
Right.
And I heard from Jim Edwards when I retired. He wrote me a long letter and he reminisced about all the jobs that we had worked on together, which surprised me because I didn't think he remembered me and our associations. But it's funny sometimes. He'd been retired for some time and he wrote Florida, so someone told him I was retiring, probably his son. And so he sat down and wrote this long letter and talked about the tough jobs we had, putting conveyors in through the press plant, how they had to go through trusses and how we had to climb up there. Rasmussen and I got on a crane and walked up in those trusses and measure those openings and see if we could get a conveyor through and stuff.
Long way down.
Yeah, right. So those are kind of some of the jobs I remember. Some of the other big jobs I remember that we did was putting in the plating plant over at Plant 3.
You know, that happened after the jet program?
Yeah, happened after I'm pretty sure it was after the jet program.
It wasn't concurrent with it.
No. And that was a big job because we were looking around at the most modern plating machines that we had. We wanted to kind of put the tanks like above floor.
Yeah.
With decks around them, not the way they were installed out in Building 78. They're in deep pits out there, which was difficult to get down to and maintain and clean up and operate from. So that turned out to be a big job. And the thing I might remember about that is that we got in trouble on that. I mean the manufacturing engineering group, because we overspent the project. And I remember Downey getting all of the manufacturing group in the Building 40 conference room and really laying it out to us.
Really?
He was a tough nut. And he just told us in all certain terms. Now, I think at the time, the guy that was heading up methods in Plant Land was Bob Russell.
Okay. Good bit.
And Bob took a shellac on that.
Did he?
Yeah.
Who kind of dreamed up that new conveyor system and all of that? Did that come out of the methods bunch?
I'm pretty sure it did. And that's when it was decided that there was going to be a project control type group in with the methods group. That's when that was organized.
Okay.
Because that thing went out of whack-a-mole.
It just sort of happened, that overrun.
Right. I think it was 1965 I got moved over to Plant 2.
Okay.
And Truxell, Bob Truxell was in the manufacturing manager's position.
Okay.
Called me over and asked me if I'd go over there and head up the differential plant. We're going to gut out everything out of those buildings, the old forging operations, get it ready for the new differential plant. And asked me if I would like to head that up. He said it was going to be a tough job in one respect, and that is that the core people that were going to stay there and work there were the old forge plant group. And I was going to come in from the main plant as an outsider, and I'd have to work with these people, and it might be difficult. That I want to do? And I said, yeah, I do it. So I ended up supervising Bert Sabat's and some of his group. It turned out to be a pretty good experience. We got along well. Everything worked out great, schedule-wise, engineering-wise. We came in on time. I think it was a successful project. And after that was over, I moved the whole group over to Plant 3. I took all of the engineers, everybody over there, and we operated from Plant 3, and we took care of Plants 2 and 3, all of the plant engineering functions. And then I was promoted to assistant plant engineer for all the operations at Plants 2, 3, 4. And after I was there a couple of years, I guess it was March of 73, I was made plant engineer.
That was Bill Rasmussen that left?
Bill Rasmussen left. Bob Cook was the works manager. They didn't call it works manager, they called it
General manufacturing.
General manufacturing manager. And just Bob called me over one day and just told me I was going to be plant engineer. And took me in and had Carroll talk to me about it.
Oh, Howard Carroll.
Yeah, which surprised me.
Yeah.
He got into it and told me what he expected. And I don't know, I always thought the plant engineer kind of didn't get too much attention and kind of worked out there in Building 40. And worked for, at that time was Bob Mooney, who worked for Bob Cook. And I thought it was pretty much between the plant engineer and Bob Mooney, that individual, whoever held that job. And then I found out that other people above him would contact you and talk to you and invite you into meetings and things. So I think I was retired in December of 84.
Okay.
So a little over 11 years as plant engineer. And as plant engineer, of course, the last job I had was converting both of those assembly plants that you worked on too, to the new bodies that were assembling over there, the Oldsmobile GM20. And I thought that was a successful operation. Is that the way you view it too?
Sure, very successful.
However, it was McDonald who was president of General Motors.
That's James
And
McDonald.
he came down after the thing was in operation and said it was not a successful operation, which surprised me.
I wonder why he told us that.
I guess because of the engineering changes, the startup rates, and those kind of things. Overall, when they looked at the whole thing, they didn't feel it was a success.
Interesting.
So I was kind of disappointed when I was told
I
that.
hadn't heard that either. Well, what the heck?
Ken Knight was kind of disappointed.
Oh, I can imagine he would have been.
I think of all the people that I worked with there, I really enjoyed working with. I had a long relationship with Bill Rasmussen. I had a good relationship with Bob Truxell. As a matter of fact, Truxell and his wife and my wife Louise and I would go on vacations to Florida together. We got to know each other, go down to Detroit for plays, play bridge together, and one thing and another. So we got to develop a relationship outside of Oldsmobile. I've had a long, good standing relationship with Bob Cook. I see Bob probably once a year, just informally, run into him. And then we have a little discussion about the old days. He's remarried incidentally.
Yes. Do
He
that.
introduced me to his wife last Christmas.
Mhm.
Brought her up, and they were in town for Christmas, I guess. I kind of enjoyed working with Bob Russell. He was a pretty good operator, I thought. Don Burnham was very unusual, but a very good operator, and I enjoyed all the relationships that I had with him. Of course, I've worked alongside and for a long time with Dave Lee, so we still keep together a relationship. He's had some problems, and I guess we've all had some problems in our lives. And but anyway, we still try to see each other a couple times a year.
How did, if you look over that continuum of time, well, did you see any changes in how we managed the railroad? How we managed the plant?
It just seemed like when I first got there, we had a lot of people that I'd call bull of the woods type operators. They were real tough.
Yeah.
Swore a lot, and get upset a lot, and pound the table a lot.
That would be like maybe Downey. I don't know if it works.
Yeah, Downey was one of them.
Okay.
Del McRae would be one of those. Mike Minnow would be one of those, and Mike Minnow had people working for him that were like that.
Okay.
General foremen out there that worked for Minnow were just as bad or worse. And as time went on, it just seemed like General Motors and Oldsmobile were trying to do a better job of training their managers. They'd send people off site. They'd send them down to the University of Michigan. They'd have programs right in plant where they would try to give them operating principles and ways of managing that might improve things. And I could kind of see that as we went along to where they're having these quality of work life groups.
Yeah.
And in the last few years that I worked there, where Ken Knight and myself and some of the other department heads, we'd meet with the union people and union representatives at least once a month.
Right.
We got some trailers in behind 62 there, and we put some of those people in there, and they worked full time. And then we'd have our meeting in there with them, and they could bring up some of their problems, and we brought up some of our problems, and it just got so that we got closer with those people.
That was a thing that had not or would not have occurred back in the early days.
Absolutely not. Some of us would even go out in the later years, the last 5 to 10 years. We'd go out in the plant and visit with hourly people and just visit with them, and if they had something they wanted to tell us, fine, or if they had a problem that they wanted to point out. But lots of times if you went out there with these people, these hourly people, and they took you out to a job condition, whether it showed poor working condition, lack of equipment, lack of tools, you could see it firsthand and kind of understand it. So if you were going to do something about it, you could work from that basis. But I think things improved in that regard over the last few years. I also enjoyed working with Bob Mooney and Ken Knight. The three of us went on a lot of trips together. After I became plant engineer, Mooney realized that I never went out of the plant very much and never went visiting other plants to look to see how they did things. And so I guess he talked to Bob Cook and told me he was going to start to take me on some of his trips. And so Ken Knight, he and I would go, usually the three of us would go together, and we'd go to a GM80 plant out east. Remember once we went for 3 or 4 days and visited 2 plants. And then he would just take me out, show me what he was looking for, what type of things he was trying to observe, and what kind of information he was trying to bring back.
Kind of for perspective.
Yeah, right. I don't know what kind of.
What about Walt? We touched on a little bit Plant 4. Were you part of the decision when we bought Plant 4, and why did we do that?
Well, at the time, there was a fellow by the name of Ken Mix. He headed up the parts warehouse operation, and that used to be in Building 62. I think they had 2 floors of building 62.
Yeah.
After Oldsmobile got to a point where they were selling so many cars, they just needed more space. I think they went out and rented space in some buildings, but it became awkward to try to manage parts in these rented spaces all over town. And it was decided that the whole operation should be housed in one big warehouse. And I can't tell you why we picked that site out on Mount Hope. I think that people from Detroit came up and helped canvass the area and found some properties that were available. And that was along a railroad site. There were certain parameters that had to be met, and price was right, so they bought that. That job went in fairly easily too. I remember we had, I was in charge of that. I had a fellow named Bob Bittmer working with me. And he did the majority of the work. And I thought the whole project came out pretty good. Then we kept adding on to that. And pretty soon we moved out our new car conditioning out there.
Mm-hmm.
They probably call that something different today too, don't they?
Probably, yeah.
I used to be in building 19, but then they needed that space for car assembly type work, so that got moved out. I think it was just a case where as production increased and we were making more and more cars, they needed more and more room in the main plant facility for car manufacturing and other related things that went directly on that cars. And that's why we moved out with a lot of these things.
Did during that time frame you were there, we went through the energy crunch and environmental kinds of activities, and so you must have seen a significant change in those sorts of activities.
Yeah, I think it was in the early 70s that we had this OPEC oil embargo.
Right.
And it looked like it was going to do a lot of things to our plant. We're going to make less cars, and we had to do something about conserving energy.
Mm-hmm.
So we organized a couple of fellows to start working on an energy development program. We looked at everything. We looked at conservation of water.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't use water, you don't pay for the water, you don't pay for the sewage charge. We looked at lighting. That was a simple thing to look at. You know, you could send people out in the plant, and did we have lights on where we didn't need them? Yeah, a lot of operations were 1 shift or 2 shift operations. There wasn't any midnight shift. We wanted to make sure those lights were turned off when that last shift went home.
Okay.
We took a stab at solar heating too. We put up a solar panel on building 68 and had that heat up the hot water for that building. But we never did really get into that too much, and we never did expand that operation. Ours was pretty much just the basics, just the sort of things you do at home to conserve. Make sure that places were properly insulated. Make sure that people weren't exceeding temperatures in the wintertime, and that the cooling didn't get out of whack in the summertime. And we just developed policies that we were going to shut the heat off on a certain date. I think it was April 15th or so. And we weren't going to energize the cooling systems till about June 1st. Okay. Sometimes we got caught because you could get a cold spell,
like this year,
or you could get a real hot, humid day, and we weren't ready with the air conditioning. Same thing happened to us in the fall. We shut down the cooling systems and wait a little bit and then turn on the heating systems. We put up in a lot of our high buildings, we put up fans up in building 56 to a lot of the heat went up in those high buildings, and we just put fans up there to drive it back down, which also saved energy. And we got so that we would develop more and more things to do, and we finally worked it into a program where we had people go out and do certain things, run audits, and then we would run reports in the operating meeting once a month. that we sent a crew out. This is what we found. And then we developed it into an award where a guy got an award for being the best, and a guy got an award for being the worst.
Oh, yeah.
And we did a lot about pollution too.
Okay.
We were very conscious about polluting the environment from the time we put the plating plant in at Plant 3.
Mm-hmm.
There were enough awareness for one reason or another between all of the engineers that we had working for us that we wanted to contain harmful chemicals. We wanted them treated before they were disposed. And we had a real regimen as to how to go through and do all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought we did an excellent job. We always had the best ventilation systems to protect employees. We would run audits on all of the equipment that had to be functioning properly to make sure we were doing this thing environmentally safe. So once a month or every 6 months, it just depends on the type of thing. Okay, but we had a regular IBM system where we had cards issued to us, and on those cards would be printed, check this fan on this location. And the card would automatically come up to us every, whatever we designated. It could be a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever. And we had a gang of people go through. And so I always felt that we were in pretty good shape. So when the legalization of these things came out from the federal government, the state government, we had OSHA developed. I felt pretty good because I thought we were there already. And we had very little trouble with federal government and with state government. As a matter of fact, I can remember one situation. We had a boat provision in case there was any oil spill on the Grand River that went around the main plant. And we had all kind of equipment in this boat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And once I remember that the city had a what they called a storm sanitary system where if there were heavy flows of stormwater, then the sanitary water got mixed up with it and went right to the river. They had a system where they were trying to divide those systems up, so you got strictly sanitary and strictly storm rather than combinations. But anyway, once out of their Board of Water and Light plant there at Moores Park, they developed an oil leak, and it got into the river just in front of Building 90, our administration building out on the river. And the EPA guy came up, he was notified, and he was in town from Detroit. He drove up. I met him in the evening. It was about 7 o'clock. We looked at this condition, and we traced it back to this manhole. And I told him my interpretation was that this came from the Board of Water and Light. He got a hold of the Board of Water and Light, and they wouldn't do anything.
Oh, no.
So I got the boat out. I got our guys out. We went out and we skimmed and gathered all this oil, and we stopped the oil. And he gave us a commendation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He said, here's a group of guys that are ready. It wasn't your problem. You sent out people anyway on the river. You cleaned it up. Turns out it's the Board of Water and Light's problem. We're going to go after them. But he said, I want to commend you guys for the work you did. So I always figured that in those areas we were in pretty good shape. We never had any real serious problems.
Sure.
But with a plant as large as we had, every once in a while you develop a leak out of a transformer or something that contained the wrong kind of oil. And we'd have to respond to that, fix it up. But overall, I was always proud of our department's ability to control the environmental impact things that we had going in the plant.
Where do we keep that boat, Walt?
Right outside of Building 62.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Up on the Yari?
Yep. It was covered up with a canvas and it was fully provisioned in there with all the kind of stuff you'd need to treat a catastrophe out there on the river.
Just had to take it down, throw it in the river and go.
Right. And that's what we did at 7 o'clock at night one night in the summertime. So, our energy conservation system got such good reviews that I was interviewed for WJM radio about the system. And then there was a write-up in the State Journal. And then we got a notice in the editorial section.
Very good.
On the good work that we were doing.
So positive comments instead of negative for a change.
Right. So we kind of enjoyed having that at the time. Oh, and I also got on Channel 6, 6 o'clock news on the same thing. The work we were doing on energy conservation.
No, plant engineers never got on TV.
No. So I came home one night and there I was. I was on Channel 6 News. Got me right in the plant. So we got some good publicity out of that, and I always figured it was a good program that it was doing Oldsmobile some good. We first got started in energy conservation not because there was a lack of energy supplies, but it just seemed years and years before it became a hot topic that we grabbed onto it once to save money. We went through like the plating plant, and where did they have water running full time that they didn't need water running full time? And where were we running other operations that required some kind of utility, natural gas, compressed air? You go through the plant and look for all the compressed air that's running and see how much you really need and how much you can shut down. And the other thing we do is look for compressed air leaks. We tried to put a group out on the weekend when the plant wasn't running and see if we could listen for compressed air leaks, tighten those up. That was pretty much a cost savings. But from that, you can spring right into energy conservation, you know. It just takes on a little different tack.
Well, how did, Walt, during that, also that continuum, did the relationship between union and management change at all that you saw?
It changed a lot in the last 5 years.
You mentioned more of the QWL and those kinds of things, but I'm thinking in terms of the union always had rigorous job descriptions and those kinds of things, and I don't know whether those were a problem or not, but then as time wore on, things changed in that arena. What specifically related to like the folks in the plant engineering organization, the chin shop and the millwrights and the plumbers and those kinds of guys?
I had an idea for a long time that what we should do is eliminate a lot of the classifications that we had. When I looked at the number of classifications and compared it with some of the other General Motors units, we had more than anybody else.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And I got Bob Mooney interested in this. And I told him I'd like to work on it and see what I could do. And we got shot down. The top guy in the labor relations group down in Detroit, and I forget his name right now, wrote a letter to general manager, who at that time happened to be Bob Cook, and mentioned me and mentioned Mooney by name. That his letter went something like this: that for years the labor relations group at General Motors has tried to work out a good relationship with the union. And here's two guys that are coming in, and we could. They use words like we could destroy things, and so we got shot down. And Cook didn't take it too serious. In other words, he didn't admonish us for doing what we were trying to do. But after that, I kind of laid low. I picked that up again, probably 3 years before I retired.
Okay. And
what I wanted to do is, I always thought it was ridiculous that if the machine went down, we'd send out a machine repairman. And he'd say, okay, I know what's wrong, but before I fix this thing, I need a pipe fitter out here to unfasten the pipe. I need an electrician to shut the power off. I need a tinsmith, better get a tinsmith from 62 to take these guards off for me. And I went out with foreman, and we looked at several of these jobs like this, and then we jotted down all of the additional help this guy needed when he went out. And I wanted to make a classification of machine repairman and give him a special designation, maybe pay him a little bit more money. But he would also have a little training in how to do some basic things in pipe fitting, electrical work, and some of those other things, so that when he went out there, he could do all that work without calling these other people, and the job would get done quicker.
Yeah, the jack of all trades.
Right. We started working on that, and it never did come to fruition, at least when I left.
So the initial one was in the 70s sometime?
Yeah, the initial one was in the 70s, and then this last spurt I tried in about 1980.
Okay.
And
we hadn't made it that time you left, Jeff.
Pardon?
We had not made that as you left.
Right. I also thought that a lot of the production people who ran machines and who had been there for some time and were fairly able people could also do certain things to that machine before calling a skilled trades. You know, after a while, after you've worked with a piece of equipment, you get to know when it's starting to sound a little bit off and what it might need, you know, and so certain things that he could be trained to do. I think that's the direction we really should be going in, to be more competitive. It just takes too damn many people to support the production guy.
How about from a training aspect of things? How did you see that change in that continuum of time, for at least the plant engineering types?
Our first training programs were primarily for electricians. When I became plant engineer, we were starting to get in from basic type electrical controls, relays and contactors, to more sophisticated kind of equipment. And there was several different brands coming on the market. I remember just before I was made plant engineer, I got a hold of Bill Rasmussen and the chief electrician and a couple other guys, and I made a little tour to tour some of these plants. There was one in Milwaukee we went to that was coming out with a new control type system. We went to General Electric, we went to Westinghouse and some of the others. And then when we came back, I think Reliance was another one. When we came back, we had to make a decision which ones that we think were the best and which ones should we stick with. And you can't have too many of these types because there's too many of them to educate people how to take care of. And so we did that, and we selected Reliance and Alan Bradley, I think it was, up in Milwaukee. And that's when we started. I went and got an appropriation, and I picked a couple of electricians that I figured could make pretty good instructors. Got an appropriation, set up a little lab and lecture room, and put some equipment in it. It wasn't very big. It was up in Building 62. And we started to have classes. We outlined the curriculum for these guys, and we put them through the curriculum, and we kept putting through, and then we would expand it to something else. And then pretty soon we decided that hydraulics was a thing that needed to be people need to be educated on, because that was getting more sophisticated. And so we added that, and then we kept adding something else. And then pretty soon we got so big we needed room over in Building 28. And so we had some classrooms up in there. And it was an operation that we handled, and we had the instructors work from us, and we'd look through their curriculum and see if it should be updated and what should we do. We listed their recommendations. And I think about, must have been around 82, that an individual came to me and said there was somebody available, I think Virginia Danford, that might be able to help us. And so we interviewed her. And I talked to Ken Knight and told her that she had some capabilities that didn't exist currently at Oldsmobile in our department.
Well, where was she from?
She worked for the school system.
Okay, so she was an
Lansing.
educator, sort of.
And she approached it a lot differently. We hired her, and what she went out and audited all of the people in the skilled trades on what they knew and what they didn't know.
Mm.
And then based on that, she set up programs as to what we should be teaching.
Okay.
Where before we just kind of picked these guys at random,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd say, well, we think this guy ought to go to school and this guy ought to go to school, and he needs his levels upgraded. And so she was approaching it more scientifically, did a better job. And so she was with us a couple of years, and we needed more and more space. We started enlarging based on her recommendations, picking up millwrights. The millwrights needed training, and tinsmiths needed training, and a lot of these other trades should be trained as long as, so in addition to the ones that we were training. So we got more space, and we ended up out there at next to Plant 3.
Okay,
That
the old
building.
school, the
Yeah.
Winter School.
Right. And I think just about a year before I retired, why the pressure was put on me from Lewandowski, who was the personnel director, that he felt that operation was getting pretty big, and education was the province of personnel. After all, they ran all these other educational programs. How come I had this big program? And the reason that we had the big program is because nobody had a program before,
Right.
and we were the ones that felt that we had the need, and we did it. So I fought them off for a while, but one day, I don't know, I just felt that maybe they were right, that it was getting too big, and it was really not our job. And so I talked to Jan, and we had some problems to work out, but we kind of transferred, and I think it worked out good for Jan too.
Was she training anybody other than your people at that juncture?
No.
Just plant engineering?
Yeah. I think now it's probably expanded.
Oh, well, yeah, it's everybody now. Yeah.
So I think it was a good move. At the time, a lot of people didn't think so. A lot of people in my department didn't like it because I was going to do that. You know, you have a tendency to want to protect your own thing. Well, you know, we wanted these people trained, and we wanted them trained right. We were the ones that started it. And if we gave it away, were they going to take some of the training away from our people and favor somebody else? There was all these problems that people had. But like I say, in the end, we decided to do it, and I think it's worked out well for everybody.
Apprentice programs, was that part of that thing or not?
No, the apprentice program was traditionally and historically run by the personnel department.
Okay. It was all during that continuum of time.
Right.
How did you relate to the apprentice program from the standpoint of need and that kind of thing?
Yeah, the way we would decide on how many apprentices we needed.
Yeah, and what kind?
I started a thing where I had Wally Schmidt. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yes.
I pulled Wally Schmidt off his job and combined his job with somebody else's, and I put him in charge of monitoring certain things in our department, like the 5,000 account. Started with the 5,000 account, went to the 3,000 account, went to some of the other accounts, to put controls on our spending for materials and labor. And then I expanded that job and had him look at apprentices. And the way we would do that is we just look at the number of skilled tradesmen we had out there working, modified skilled tradesmen, and we'd look at ages. The guy got to be 55 and he had 30 years. I figured he was a candidate to leave. So I'd have Wally go through and pick how many guys have we got like that in each trade, and when might they go. And then I'd say, in order to, if they're going to go during these years, then we got to put these apprentices in 4 years ahead of time to graduate to replace those guys. A lot of the people we had in skilled trades, though, weren't graduate apprentices. They came up in what they would call employee in training.
Okay.
And if you had an expansion program going on, and every once in a while, you know, production would go up, and they'd add production people, and you had to add skilled trades, and there weren't any apprentices coming out of the program, then you have to put on these EITs, employees in training.
Okay.
So you'd interview people that had some kind of past experience in the Army or someplace else in the electrical field or in the pipe fitting field or millwright field, and you put them on. Lots of times we put on these people in the summertime during model change because there'd be so much work to be done in a short period of time. We'd put on these EITs then, and that would be a good time to observe them to see if they might eventually get into the classifications.
Would they be a pool to draw from, so
Yeah.
to speak?
So once, if they came in for 3 months, let's say in the summertime, then they'd go back to their production jobs. And then if you had an increase in production, you wanted somebody on permanently, you draw from those people.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are the people that needed the training.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't so much the apprentices that went out as electricians that needed to be updated in the latest controls, and they were these EITs, and that's where we got originally into these training programs.
Mm-hmm.
And lost my train of thought there. So anyway, our skilled trades were composed of journeymen, electricians who came from the apprenticeship program, and EITs who eventually would become journeymen after they had been in the trade so many years.
Okay.
And they were also called journeymen after they satisfied.
Okay. Did the union have to buy off on that, so to speak, or was that?
That was part of a union agreement.
the
It was
union
written in the union agreements that how EITs would come into your department, how they got to be journeymen, all this and that. But basically, those are the guys that needed all this heavy instruction. And I think that's probably still true today. You know, it's hard to forecast the number of apprentices you need, because there might be times when you've got a big class coming out, and all of a sudden you're going down, production's going down, you're laying off people. Now you got these apprentices coming out. Yeah, right.
Did you get involved, Walt, with discussions with the union directly yourself, or was that with other folks doing that?
I would get involved if it got to a point where it couldn't be settled. They had a procedure set up where if there was something wrong in the plant, and they couldn't resolve it between the supervision and the first line union representative, they'd write out a grievance. The grievance would go to the general foreman. If he couldn't satisfy the grievance, then it would go directly to labor relations.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of times when labor relations get them, when they couldn't work them out, they'd send the guy up to see me and see if we could work out some agreement. So I would get involved with them occasionally. During contract negotiation time, I think contract negotiation is this year.
Mm-hmm.
About February, I'd sit down and write a long letter to the personnel department, Bureau Cutler or Sam Donning or somebody. And I'd say contract negotiations are coming up. Here are some things I think need changing in the local union agreement. And here's what I think needs changing in the national agreement with General Motors. And I'd always put in this thing that we ought to change these classifications.
Yeah.
And I'd have, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages that I'd send over there. I do that every year, just ritually. When contract negotiations were just about to be resolved, but they had some sticky things that they couldn't resolve, generally I would be called over, and sometimes it would take a walk through and look at something in the plant that they got hung up on.
Mm-hmm.
Or we'd have to negotiate with a union or something. And Oldsmobile top people were always anxious to sign, get this thing done with. You know, they didn't want to run into any problems.
Was it more pushed that way than to be reasonable, so to speak, or?
I think it was both. They never wanted to be the one that was holding up a national agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of times you read in the paper that so many GM divisions have resolved their local agreements, but Buick is still holding out, or Pontiac is still holding out. Well, nobody ever wanted to be mentioned that way in the newspaper.
Okay.
So we had that every 3 years, I guess. I remember the one strike we had was when I was over at Plant 3, so that must have been about 68 or 69, something like 70. And didn't get resolved, and the national agreement didn't get resolved, and we were on strike for quite a little while.
And we were out of the plant?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, we were looking for a place we could go to or something.
Outside office.
Yeah. And I guess it turned out that that wasn't necessary, that they did let us in the offices. We never did have to go to the outside offices. We were able to work, and it lasted a couple months, which is always hard on everybody. You got all that big capital investment just sitting there, not making any pieces. All these people out, not making any money. It's hard on the economy, hard on them.
Did Walt, over that period of time, did the union's demands change in flavor at all that you could sense over that period of time?
I think that basically the union always was fairly satisfied. They reached a certain level, I felt. This is just me talking, but I felt that they reached a certain level where they felt fairly satisfied with their position. But then they were always looking for just a little bit more, you know. And so the kind of things they were looking for were things like better lighting someplace, better entrance into the building, better locker facilities, better shower facilities, you know, things like that, better parking facilities they wanted. And I think they were just like anybody else. You know, you feel like you're not in too bad a shape, but you hate to admit it. So you're always going to ask for just a little bit more. So I don't know, ever since I was a plant engineer, I never felt that we had any big major problems. There were always these little things that they wanted and kept getting improvement on. And it got to the point where we start bringing females into the skilled trades.
Yeah, that's a unique problem.
And first females we brought in the building 62, we weren't very well prepared for that. By that I mean we didn't have proper dressing area for them. They didn't have their own restrooms. And it took a while to realize that we had to do something about that. And so, you know, we had temporary restrooms for them upstairs that other women were using that they had to use with them. We had to screen off places where they might want to have lockers and get dressed. It got to be a problem, and we also had some problems where the men weren't treating the women very well either in some of the areas.
When did that first push of ladies start to happen?
Probably my first real experience with it would have been around early 70s. 1970, right? We just realized that there were women out there who wanted these opportunities, and there were a lot of them that were working in production. And they were making application for these kind of jobs. They wanted to improve themselves. They saw themselves as working on for some years. And some of the women were very capable. And we started putting them into the apprenticeship program. Some of those women that came out of there, both electricians, were real able people, could really take on a job and do it.
The old timers, did they accept that sort of thing, or how was that?
That was mixed, but there were a lot of them that did. And there were a lot of management people who, if you sent out a female electrician, I got called out once.
No kidding.
Oh yeah. I got called over to Plant 3 because we had a big problem over there and there was a female electrician on the job. That's why I was called.
Just because it was a female?
Right.
Not whether the person was capable or not.
And she turned out to be a real capable person. I knew about her I asked about her when I got there. Isn't this the gal that I hear? I said, yeah, she's real good. That kind of puts you in a hell of a position.
Oh, it does. Very embarrassing. Yeah.
I left her on the job, and I just got the guy that called me aside, and I said, explained it. She was real capable. She was a graduate of our apprenticeship program that's done quite well. Everybody thinks highly of her and can really diagnose and do a job.
Then, as time wore on, how did that change?
I think, like every place, it's just more acceptable.
People now feel pretty comfortable with that sort of situation.
Sure. Now we start getting female engineers.
Oh, yeah.
Building 40. And then we had some supervisors come in. I remember Sandy Stoltesiak worked with our group. She was the 8th level supervisor. I thought she was very capable of what she was doing there. But even people like that would run up against people that would give them a hard time. I can remember being in a meeting with some pretty high-level managers, and there were 2 women that came in to explain something about administrative policy and what we had to do. One thing about it. Boy, these guys really gave me a hard time. And I took a position where I protected them. I said, now wait a minute, you guys. These gals were sent over here to explain something to us. It isn't their idea. They're trying to help us. We finally got over it. But so I think as time goes on, they're going to, in all levels, hourly levels, skilled trades levels, salary levels, it's got to be more acceptable.
It's sort of a generation to change that sort of thing.
Yeah,
isn't it?
right. Look at Jan Danford, right?
True.
I think she's
Very
accepted,
capable person.
right?
Yeah.
And probably when we brought her in there and put her in charge, that's the first time we did that. We never had any females in our instructor group. They were all guys that had come up through the plant, through the ranks, and we put them on salary. They were instructors. We sent them to school. We got them equipped as best we could, and that's what we had. That was our cadre out there. Now all of a sudden we got Jan Danford. Now she's in charge of these guys. So I think it's more and more acceptable, and as time goes on, it'll be more and more acceptable. Look at all the gals that are running for governor and House of Representatives, senators. Well, I think I've kind of run out of steam.
If I run out of gas. Of 4136 Barton Road, Lansing, Michigan, 48917. The recording was made on June 13th, 1990 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center in Lansing at 4000 North Grand River. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes. See, Walt, if you had to pick what was maybe the biggest event or the biggest single happening at the plant during the whole time you were there, what would you pick?
Probably this last job we did where we did the GM 20 program. It was such a large task that had to be done within certain limits, schedule-wise, that we sat down early and we decided to get some outside help to help us with the scheduling and to keep it on schedule. And that whole paint plant had to be kind of done over. There were 2 assembly plants that had to be done over. There were some other associated operations. There was a new system of assembling engines in Building 20 that we had to put in. I don't know if they're using that right now or not, do you?
I don't know, I've been over there, so can't answer that.
And it was just so widespread and large and so many elements that had to come together right. And in my view, I think our department, all the guys that worked on that did an excellent job. I think it came out great. It came out on time, came out within budget.
Right.
And I thought it was a pretty good success, contrary to what Mr. McDonald
What Mr. McDonald said.
And so, looking back, I see that as
that's a big single event.
Big single event, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well, one other thing maybe for perspective, how, from the time you started until the time you end, how did the department change from a physical size sort of thing?
Well, when I started there, I'm going to say that in the plant engineering design section, there might have been 8 or 10 people in there.
Okay.
And out in the plant, there might have been probably 1,000 hourly people.
Okay, these are the millwrights and the plumbers,
Yeah,
all those people.
right.
Yeah, okay.
When I left, I think we had around 250 salary people in engineering and in maintenance, supervision, salary people type activities, and over 2,000 hourly people. One of the things that I worked on just before I left was that I kind of enjoyed doing too was working on a new type organization. And we had started on that long before it became known that we were going to reorganize to the organization that we know out there now. I always felt that we could do things a little bit differently. It was hard to convince people because a lot of people, the old timers, it was hard to do anything with those people. If I tried to do something in the hourly group by decreasing numbers or anything, they just fall apart on you. They've always done it that way, and they just couldn't believe that I'd suggest that, you know. Working on the overall organization, I got with Ken Knight once and told him that back in '72, that I felt that we could break the laboratory into 2 groups. And the group that was working pretty much with environmental type things, the plating plant, some of those things, that we could supervise, and we could also then that we were then responsible for the environmental stuff that went out of the plant. Now we'd be also supervising the processes as they went in. And that the other part, the metallurgical part, could go to one of the process engineering group. And I said, then you could eliminate that department. I wrote that up in a letter in '73 and sent it to Mooney. And he was very interested in that, and he sent it on to Cook and said that he thought we'd do that. But I don't know what happened. We never did get into to develop that at that time. So we picked that up again in about '82. And it looked like that's what we were going to do. That old program was going to come back. And I also felt that we could take part of the plant layout department and integrate that with plant engineering. And we were almost going to eliminate the methods plant engineering group. That the other half could go with the process group. So we wouldn't have plant layout methods, and we wouldn't have lab, but they'd be integrated in these other groups. And we did a lot of work on that. I made a lot of charts, organizational charts. I figured that at the time that I was plant engineer, I had 3 assistant plant engineers. I figured that I didn't need any. And so I eliminated 3 guys. We had off-site meetings with Tracy. I remember going out to the university club for one whole week. And all we did was get in a room like this and hang charts up on the wall and make organizational charts. And it was in one of those meetings that we decided that looks like what we should do is I should divest our department of all of those support groups on the plant.
Okay.
And it looked like they should report, the guys who were out there working for car assembly would report to the superintendent of car assembly.
Okay.
And it also looked like I'd have to pull a couple of guys out of Dave Lee's group and put them out there in car assembly.
So engineers would go there.
Engineers would go out there too.
Okay.
And then they'd have their own little organization as to how they would report. So that's where we were. That's what we were doing when I left. I had already divested our department of the engine plant group. And I remember going down the engine plant once, and my old foreman came up to me and said, "So you sold us down the river, eh, Walt?" Because that's the way they looked at it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they weren't too happy.
Yeah.
And so I had Dave pluck out a couple engineers and send down the engine plant. And we did that with the assembly plant group, and we plucked out a couple engineers, sent them out there. So we were in the process of doing that. And when I left, we hadn't completely done it, but we were pretty well there. And then I guess my old group now got moved over to Building 62.
Yeah.
They invite me back over there once a year for a little Christmas thing, so I get to see what they're doing and what their new location's like, get a tour of the old shops and everything.
Right.
And so anyway, I thought that reorganizing had a lot of merit. Always had a lot of merit to me, and I thought we should have gone further with the hourly groups. We should have knocked out a lot of those classifications. We had classifications like yard labor and building repair general and all kind of classifications that when you looked at what these guys did, it was almost the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
You can always keep making more classifications if you want, but what that does, it restricts you when you have layoffs. It restricts you when you have to schedule overtime in the plant. You needed one of these and one of these and one of these, you know, instead of just one guy, you ended up with 6. And I still think that's kind of a problem that somehow the unions got to realize. I'm sure they must realize it.
Yeah,
They're just hanging in there, you know. And
it's the way you and I do it at home.
yeah, right.
Oh.
So,
Okay. Well, that's a nice job, Walt. Appreciate it.
okay.